All right, so we're going to keep talking about color. And again, to date, we've talked about the gradient tool, we've talked about the paint bucket, we've talked about access to patterns. And while I'm there, I'm going to go ahead and set that back to foreground. Remember, it's going to remember your previous settings. So sometimes students will come back and try to do work and can't figure out why flowers keep filling all of their shapes. And it's because they're still set to pattern up here. So I reset that while I'm here. Um, you do have some panels related to color. They are not as useful, in my opinion, as the ones in Illustrator. But again, you have your color panel, which works very similarly to the color picker. And so you'll see if you watch my foreground while I have this open, I can change my tint or shade of this particular hue, and I can select a new hue. You also have a swatches panel, and it does load with previously used colors. So if you have worked on something for a few minutes and you really wish you could get back to a hue that you were using a few moments ago, it's likely still on your swatches panel. So go back and grab that, okay? Um, After that, the other color tool I find really helpful is something that probably would not seem like a color tool, but it's your eyedropper. And what that does is it samples color from an image. And I find that really helpful with particular hues. So for instance, if I was working on a project for a client and I knew that they, were maybe an outdoor related company, or they told me that their favorite color is like a lawn green, the color of grass, I could come in here and try to find the best version of a grassy green, but that's really hard to do. And so I had you open this picture of a sunflower for that very reason. Okay, again, if I was working on an assignment and I knew that it needed to be a golden yellow, I could come in here and click around, and you're going to see as I click around, a lot of these yellows I'm choosing, these sort of yellowy golds, look very grayed out. Okay, they're not really what comes to mind for me personally. So I find it helpful sometimes to do a Google search and say, okay, just give me a picture of a sunflower. I'll grab my eyedropper and I will just color sample it. And now that I've clicked again with my eyedropper, all I need to do, you'll see if I click, it's going to immediately sample the pixel that I was on and place it in my foreground. So again, I'll come back to my sunflower. Now I've got a really great golden yellow, okay, that will follow me back over to this document. I can grab my paint bucket and I can now fill this shape with the exact color of a golden yellow that I need for my project without the trouble of working through and trying to find the perfect hue over here in my color picker, okay? So I find that really helpful. Now that we have filled this shape and I've got something to work with, go ahead and put yourself back on your move tool. Okay, I'm just going to center this so I've got something to work with. And I want you to come over to your layers panel and I want you to click on this button. It says FX. So I usually call it the effects button, but it's really to add a layer style. And there's a lot here to work with. I'm not going to go through every single one of these options. I'm just going to go through enough that you feel confident that you can figure out how to work the rest of them. Okay, so we'll do a couple. And one of the ones that are really popular, if you want to go ahead and open Drop Shadow, you'll see that when you open or when you select one of those options, you're going to get this enormous dialog box. And you're going to see that there are even more options that didn't immediately pop up here in the original menu. And again, so I chose Drop Shadow, and you're going to see a number of different options here. And I've played with these a little bit, so my settings are going to be different than yours. But drop shadows are almost always made up of black, and the opacity is generally much, much lower than it currently is set to. Okay. You'll see again that you can play with the color, you can play with the opacity, you can change the angle. Okay, so think of it as in terms of maybe where the sun is coming up or setting against this particular shape. You can also change the distance. Okay, so I can make it look like my object is floating higher above my shape. I can change the spread. Okay, so that's going to soften it a great deal. And I can also change the size. Okay, so if I change the size of that and change the distance, I'm going to get what most of you probably think of as a more typical drop shadow. Okay. In the old days of the internet, this was sort of something that we deemed sort of unattractive, or it sort of aged a website. You would sometimes find that websites would place drop shadows on their buttons. Those buttons would contain links that would take you to other pages. But this is a really handy tool for project number 4, particularly if you're introducing an object that didn't originally exist in the photo. So for instance, if you're placing sunglasses on someone's face, okay, when you have sunglasses on, it tends to cast a shadow. And when there's no shadow present, it can look very fake. Okay, so again, if you are placing something into your image for project number 4, sometimes just introducing that drop shadow will take it from something that looks a little weird and out of place to feeling like it was always present in the photo. Okay, so drop shadows, again, really helpful. Inner shadows work very similarly. It's just on the inside of the shape. And again, I didn't change the color of the drop shadow. It's almost always black, but for the inner shadow, I'll choose something more dynamic. I'll change the distance so it's a little bit easier to see. And actually, you're going to see that I didn't actually change my setting. Okay, you're seeing how my drop shadow is changing color. It's because even though I clicked inner shadow, I didn't actually make inner shadow active. So I'm going to step back, get myself back to where that is a gray color. Okay, I'm kind of stuck here. I've done too many steps, won't let me go back but so far. So I'm going to keep my pink drop shadow. I'm going to go ahead and place myself on inner shadow the way I was supposed to. And I'll just fiddle with this. Okay, and again, that shadow is making it look like perhaps there is a white page and it's cut out and there's yellow behind it. Okay, it's going to change the appearance of that. Some other options, stroke is one that is very popular, okay, because often you've already had some exposure to it, and this semester you've certainly had a lot of exposure to it because we used it in Illustrator. When you work with stroke, you still have options like size and color, but the difference here in Photoshop is the position. Okay, if I put it on the inside, okay, it's going to very directly trace the shape, so it looks like the square that it was previously. If I go to the outside, it's going to soften the corners and they almost look rounded. Okay, and I can also place it in the center. Okay, so it's placed directly on the border. So that is something that students find very helpful in these projects. I'm just going to uncheck all of these options because it's starting to get a little crazy over here. I'll go ahead and choose Bevel and Emboss, and I'll click it to make it active. There are, again, lots of options on this one, but the things that render the biggest change are up here under Structure. So you've got Inner Bevel, you've got Emboss, you've got Stroke Emboss, you've got Pillow Emboss. And to make these more evident, I'm going to change the depth and the size. Okay, and now as I run through those, okay, you should more clearly see the changes. Okay, you can change the technique, so I can make that more of a chisel hard, where this could look like it was chiseled out of gold. Okay, I can soften that chisel. You can soften it more with this slider. Again, you can change the size. Okay, so again, we went through Bevel and Emboss, Stroke, Inner and Outer Shadows. Okay, that should be enough for you to feel confident in playing with the other options as you progress through project number 4. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and I will be back in a moment to talk a little bit about your discussion board assignment for today.